Mother Bear carried baby through hurricane to reach medical help. What happened next was heroic. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, drumming against the windows of Ethan Marshall's remote cabin with the kind of persistence that made a person forget what silence sounded like. He sat at his wooden desk, surrounded by research papers and wildlife photographs, listening to the storm's symphony. The wind howled through the towering pines outside, bending them in ways that seemed impossible, yet they held firm against nature's fury. Ethan had grown accustomed to the isolation of his forest research station, but tonight felt different. There was something in the air, something that made his skin prickle with anticipation. The weather reports had warned of a hurricane making its way inland, an unusual occurrence for this mountainous region. Most people had evacuated days ago, but Ethan remained, committed to his decade-long study of the local wildlife population. His cabin, built sturdy and deep in the woods, had weathered many storms before. The generator hummed quietly in the corner, providing the only electric light for miles around. Outside, the darkness was complete, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the swaying trees like ghostly dancers. Ethan pushed back from his desk and walked to the kitchen, where he poured himself another cup of coffee. The hot liquid warmed his hands as he held the mug, steam rising in delicate spirals. He had been documenting unusual animal behavior patterns for weeks now, noting how creatures seemed to be moving in patterns he had never observed before. Bears, in particular, had been acting strangely, appearing in areas where they typically avoided during this season. Something was drawing them, but he couldn't determine what. The storm intensified as the night wore on, and Ethan found himself drawn to the large window that faced the forest. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by thunder that shook the cabin's foundation. In those brief moments of illumination, he could see the forest floor, littered with broken branches and leaves. The rain fell so hard it seemed to bounce back up from the ground, creating a misty haze that made everything appear dreamlike and surreal. As he stood there, coffee growing cold in his hands, Ethan heard something that made him freeze. It wasn't the wind or the rain or even the thunder. It was something else entirely, something deliberate and rhythmic. He pressed his ear against the glass, straining to hear above the storm's roar. There it was again, a sound that didn't belong to the chaos outside. It was steady, purposeful, like footsteps, but heavier than any human could make. Ethan set his mug down and grabbed his flashlight from the kitchen counter. The beam cut through the darkness as he opened the front door, immediately feeling the full force of the storm. Rain lashed against his face, and the wind nearly knocked him backward. He had to squint to see anything beyond a few feet, but he kept the flashlight steady, sweeping it across the clearing in front of his cabin. The sound came again, closer this time, and Ethan's heart began to race. In all his years of wildlife research, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct told him that something extraordinary was about to happen. He stepped onto the covered porch, staying under the roof's protection while keeping the flashlight aimed into the storm. The rain created a curtain of water that seemed to move and shift with each gust of wind. Then he saw it, and his breath caught in his throat. A massive shape emerged from the tree line, moving slowly but with unmistakable purpose. At first, Ethan thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, that the storm and darkness were creating illusions. But as the shape drew closer, there was no mistaking what he was seeing. An enormous brown bear was walking directly toward his cabin, and she was not alone. The bear moved with a strange, almost human-like determination, her massive paws splashing through the muddy ground with each step. But what made Ethan's pulse quicken was what she carried. Cradled carefully in her mouth like a mother cat carrying a kitten, was a small bear cub. The little one hung limp and still, and even from this distance, Ethan could see that something was terribly wrong. The mother bear stopped about 20 feet from the porch, and in the flashlight's beam, Ethan could see her clearly. She was magnificent, easily 6 feet tall even on all fours, with thick, chocolate-colored fur that was now matted and dripping with rain. Her small, dark eyes reflected the light as she looked directly at him, and in that gaze, Ethan saw something he had never witnessed in a wild bear before. There was no aggression, no territorial warning. Instead, there was something that looked remarkably like desperation, like a plea for help. The cub in her mouth was tiny, probably only a few months old, with fur so light it was almost golden. It showed no signs of movement, no indication that it was even breathing. The mother bear gently lowered her baby to the ground, never taking her eyes off Ethan. She nudged the cub with her nose, a gesture so tender and heartbreaking that Ethan felt tears mixing with the rain on his face. For several minutes, they remained in this impossible standoff. The storm raged around them, but it seemed to fade into the background as Ethan tried to process what he was witnessing. In his years of research, he had observed thousands of animal interactions, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The mother bear was asking for help, as clearly as if she had spoken the words aloud. Ethan's mind raced through everything he knew about bear behavior. They were solitary creatures, fiercely protective of their young, and they avoided human contact at all costs. For a mother bear to approach a human dwelling with her cub was not just unusual, it was unprecedented. Yet here she stood, in the middle of a hurricane, having traveled who knows how far through dangerous conditions, seeking help from the very species bears typically feared most. The cub stirred slightly, letting out a weak, mewing sound that was barely audible above the storm. The mother bear immediately lowered her head, gently licking her baby's fur. The gesture was so full of love and worry that Ethan felt his heart break a little. He had spent his career observing animals from a scientific distance, but this was different. This was personal, intimate, and desperately urgent. As if sensing his thoughts, the mother bear looked up at him again. Her expression was impossible to misinterpret. She had brought her dying baby to the only source of help she could find, and she was waiting to see what he would do. The weight of that trust, the magnitude of what she was asking, settled on Ethan's shoulders like a physical burden. He knew he should call for help, contact the wildlife authorities or a veterinarian, but the storm had knocked out the phone lines hours ago. His cell phone had no signal this deep in the forest, and the nearest town was 30 miles away on roads that were now impassable. He was completely alone with this impossible situation, and a mother's desperate hope was focused entirely on him. The rain continued to fall, creating small rivers that ran off the cabin's roof and pooled in the yard around the bear and her cub. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark, dramatic flashes, and in those moments, Ethan could see the full tragedy of the situation. The cub was clearly in distress, its breathing shallow and labored. Whatever was wrong with it was serious, possibly life-threatening, and time was running out. Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He slowly stepped down from the porch, moving with deliberate, non-threatening motions. The mother bear watched his every move but didn't retreat or show any signs of aggression. As he drew closer, he could see more details of the cub's condition. Its left front paw was swollen and discolored, and there appeared to be something embedded in the pad. The mother bear allowed him to approach within 10 feet before she gave a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl but clearly meant, "That's close enough." Ethan respected the boundary and knelt in the mud, making himself smaller and less threatening. From this distance, he could see that the cub was indeed breathing, but each breath seemed to require tremendous effort. "I want to help," Ethan said softly, his voice barely carrying over the storm. "But I need you to trust me." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth, speaking to a wild animal as if she could understand. But something about this entire situation had moved beyond the realm of normal wildlife interaction. The mother bear tilted her head slightly, as if she was actually listening to his words. Then, in a gesture that defied everything Ethan thought he knew about bear behavior, she took a step backward, giving him slightly more access to her cub. The message was clear. She was willing to let him try. Ethan's hand shook as he reached into his jacket pocket for his phone, hoping against hope that he might have caught a signal. The screen showed no bars, but as he held it up, trying different angles, he noticed something. There was a brief flicker, just one bar, probably bouncing off a distant cell tower. It wasn't much, but it might be enough for a text message or a short call. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, sending a message to the only person he could think of who might be able to help. Lily Morgan was a veterinarian who specialized in wildlife, and she lived about 40 miles away. They had worked together on several research projects, and she was one of the few people who would understand the urgency of this situation. The message was simple. Emergency. Mother bear brought sick cub to my cabin. Storm trapped. Need help. Please. As he waited to see if the message would send, Ethan looked back at the mother bear and her cub. The little one had opened its eyes, dark and glassy with pain, but alert enough to look around. When its gaze met Ethan's, he felt a connection that transcended species, a recognition of shared concern and the desire to help. The phone buzzed in his hand, indicating that the message had been sent. Now, all he could do was wait and hope that Lily would receive it and somehow find a way to help, despite the storm and the distance between them. In the meantime, he was the only thing standing between this cub and whatever fate awaited it. The mother bear seemed to sense that he was trying to help. She settled down beside her cub, creating a protective barrier with her massive body while still allowing Ethan to observe. The rain continued to fall, but the three of them remained in their strange vigil, united by circumstances that none of them could have predicted. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself drawn deeper into this incredible situation. He had always believed that his role as a researcher was to observe and document, never to interfere with natural processes. But this felt different. This wasn't about science or research protocols. This was about compassion, about responding to a desperate mother's plea for help, regardless of species boundaries. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Ethan knew that whatever was going to happen would have to happen here, in his remote cabin, with whatever resources he could muster. The mother bear had made an impossible journey through dangerous conditions to reach him, and now it was his turn to prove worthy of that trust. He thought about all the wildlife he had observed over the years, all the natural dramas he had witnessed from a safe distance. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, when the line between observer and participant had completely disappeared, when a wild, mother's love had reached across species to ask for his help. The cub made another soft sound, and its mother immediately responded, gently nuzzling its head with her massive snout. The tenderness of the gesture, the obvious depth of her love and concern, reminded Ethan that despite all the differences between species, the bond between mother and child was universal, transcending every boundary that nature had created. As he knelt there in the mud and rain, watching this incredible scene unfold, Ethan realized that he was witnessing something that few humans would ever see. This was trust in its purest form, love that knew no boundaries, and hope that refused to give up even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Chapter 2. A Bridge of Trust. The hours that followed were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced in his years of wildlife research. The mother bear had settled into a watchful position near her cub, creating a protective semicircle with her massive body while keeping her intelligent eyes fixed on Ethan. The storm continued to rage around them, but within this small circle of trust there was an almost sacred calm. Ethan had moved closer, inch by careful inch, until he was close enough to see the details of the cub's condition without triggering any defensive response from its mother. The little bear was breathing, but each breath seemed labored and shallow. Its left front paw was definitely the source of the problem, swollen to nearly twice its normal size and showing signs of infection. In the beam of his flashlight, Ethan could see what appeared to be a foreign object embedded deep in the paw pad, something dark and angular that definitely didn't belong there. The surrounding tissue was inflamed and hot to the touch, indicating that whatever had happened had occurred several days ago and was getting progressively worse. Ethan's phone had remained frustratingly silent since he sent the message to Lily. The single bar of signal had disappeared entirely, leaving him completely cut off from the outside world. But as he sat there in the rain, watching the mother bear tend to her sick baby with such gentle devotion, he realized that help might not come from outside. This situation was going to require him to step far beyond his comfort zone as a researcher and into territory he had never imagined exploring. The cub opened its eyes periodically, looking around with the confused awareness of a sick child. Each time it stirred, its mother would immediately lean down to nuzzle it, making soft rumbling sounds that Ethan had never heard from a wild bear before. These weren't the typical vocalizations he had documented in his research. These sounds were softer, more intimate, clearly meant to comfort and reassure. It was a private language between mother and child, and Ethan felt privileged to witness it. As dawn began to break through the storm clouds, the rain finally started to lessen from the torrential downpour to a steady, manageable precipitation. The change in weather seemed to give the mother bear some relief, and she allowed herself to relax slightly, though her attention never wavered from her cub. Ethan took advantage of the improved visibility to get a better look at both bears, and what he saw filled him with even more questions. The mother bear was enormous, easily one of the largest he had ever encountered, but her condition suggested she had been traveling for days, possibly weeks. Her fur was matted not just from the rain, but from extended exposure to rough terrain. There were small scratches and scrapes along her sides and legs, evidence of a difficult journey through dense forest and rocky terrain. Most telling of all, she appeared to have lost significant weight, her ribs visible beneath her thick coat in a way that indicated she hadn't been eating regularly. The cub, despite its obvious illness, showed signs of having been well cared for during their journey. Its fur, though dirty from the storm, was clean and well-groomed where its mother had been able to tend to it. The little bear had clearly been the focus of all the mother's attention and energy, even at the cost of her own well-being. This level of sacrifice and dedication was remarkable in any species, but in a wild bear it was extraordinary. Ethan's contemplation was interrupted by the sudden buzzing of his phone. His heart leaped as he saw a message from Lily. "Got your message." Roads washed out but trying to find way. Can you describe symptoms? The relief he felt at this connection to help was overwhelming, and he quickly typed back a detailed description of what he was observing. The exchange of messages was slow and frustrating, with long gaps between responses as the weak signal came and went. But gradually, a picture began to emerge. Lily confirmed his suspicion that there was a foreign object in the cub's paw, and from his description she was concerned about the level of infection that had set in. Without proper treatment, the situation was indeed life-threatening. "Can you see what's embedded in the paw?" came Lily's next message. Need to know if it's something that can be safely removed. Ethan looked at the mother bear, who had been watching his phone activity with curious attention. It was as if she understood that he was trying to get help, and her posture had relaxed even further. Taking this as encouragement, he slowly moved his flashlight closer to the cub's injured paw, being careful to telegraph his movements so the mother would know he meant no harm. What he saw in the bright beam made him gasp. Embedded deep in the soft pad of the cub's paw was what appeared to be a large thorn, but unlike any plant material he recognized from the local flora. It was dark, almost black, with an unusual metallic sheen that caught the light in strange ways. The thorn was deeply embedded, with only about an inch visible above the swollen tissue, but it was clearly the source of the infection and the cub's distress. He quickly messaged this information to Lily, whose response came back faster than usual. "That doesn't sound like any local plant. Can you take a photo?" Ethan carefully positioned his phone to capture the best possible image of the embedded object. The camera's flash caused both bears to startle slightly, but the mother bear's reaction was more curious than alarmed. She leaned forward to sniff at the phone, her massive head coming within inches of Ethan's hands. The trust she was showing was unprecedented, and he felt the weight of responsibility that came with it. The photo was blurry due to the lighting conditions and the phone's struggle to focus on such a small object, but it was clear enough to show the unusual nature of the embedded thorn. Lily's response, when it came, was filled with concern. "Never seen anything like that. Doesn't match any regional plants. Where did they come from?" This question opened up an entirely new dimension to the mystery. Ethan had assumed that the bears were local, perhaps from a territory deeper in the forest that he hadn't explored. But the mother bear's condition, the strange thorn in her cub's paw, and her unprecedented behavior all suggested that their journey had been much longer and more unusual than he had initially thought. He began to study the mother bear more carefully, looking for clues about where she might have come from. Her size was remarkable, larger than the typical brown bears in this region. Her coloring, too, was slightly different, with subtle variations in the brown tones of her fur that didn't quite match the local population he had been studying. Most intriguingly, there were small scars along her back and sides that appeared to be old, healed wounds from encounters with something that left very distinctive marks. The cub stirred again, this time making a soft whimpering sound that was clearly one of pain. Its mother immediately responded, but there was a new urgency in her movements, a desperation that suggested the little one's condition was worsening. She looked at Ethan with those intelligent eyes, and the message was unmistakable. Time was running out. Ethan's phone buzzed with another message from Lily. "Storm clearing here. Trying to reach you, but roads still bad. You may need to attempt removal yourself. Are you willing?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan had never performed any kind of medical procedure on a wild animal, let alone surgery on a bear cub, while its massive mother watched. The risks were enormous, not just to the cub, but to himself. One wrong move, one moment of pain that the mother bear interpreted as an attack on her baby, and the situation could turn deadly in an instant. But as he looked at the cub, now clearly struggling with each breath, and at its mother, whose trust in him was absolute and heartbreaking, Ethan knew there was really only one answer he could give. "Yes," he typed back. "Tell me what to do." What followed was the most intense and detailed text message conversation of Ethan's life. Lily, drawing on her years of veterinary experience, walked him through the basics of what would need to be done. The thorn would have to be removed carefully, without breaking it off, and leaving pieces embedded in the tissue. The wound would need to be cleaned and treated to combat the infection. Most critically, All of this would have to be done in a way that minimized pain and stress to the cub, because any sign of distress would likely trigger a protective response from the mother. "You'll need supplies," Lily messaged. "Clean water, tweezers or small pliers, antiseptic, clean cloths. Do you have a first aid kit?" Ethan mentally inventoried his cabin supplies. As a researcher living in a remote location, he kept a well-stocked first aid kit, and his years of fieldwork had taught him to be prepared for emergencies. He had most of what Lily was describing, though he had never imagined using these supplies on a wild bear cub. "I have what you listed," he replied. "But how do I keep the mother calm during the procedure?" "That's the biggest risk," came Lily's response. "She's shown incredible trust so far. You'll have to rely on that continuing. Move slowly, talk to her, let her see everything you're doing. If she gets agitated, stop immediately." Ethan gathered his supplies, moving carefully around the cabin while keeping the bears in sight. The mother bear watched his every movement with intense interest, but showed no signs of alarm. It was as if she understood that these preparations were meant to help her cub. When he returned with his first aid kit and a bowl of clean, warm water, she actually shifted positions slightly to give him better access to her baby. The next few minutes were among the most tense and extraordinary of Ethan's life. With Lily guiding him through text messages, he began the delicate process of examining the embedded thorn more closely. The mother bear's breathing was the only sound besides the diminishing rain, each exhale a warm puff of air that Ethan could feel on his hands as he worked. The thorn was embedded even more deeply than he had initially thought, and the surrounding tissue was severely inflamed. But as he gently cleaned around the wound with antiseptic, he began to see that the object might be removable without causing additional damage. The key would be patience and precision, qualities that his years of detailed wildlife observation had taught him to value. "Ready for the extraction?" came Lily's message. "Remember, steady pressure, straight out, don't twist or angle it." Ethan positioned his small pliers around the visible portion of the thorn, acutely aware that the mother bear's massive head was less than 2 feet away, watching his every move. The cub was awake now, looking up at him with those dark, trusting eyes that seemed to mirror its mother's faith in his intentions. As he began to apply gentle, steady pressure to the embedded object, Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle over him like a blanket. This was no longer about research or scientific observation. This was about trust, compassion, and the willingness to step across the boundaries that typically separated human and animal worlds. The mother bear had made an impossible journey to reach him, had placed her most precious treasure in his hands, and now everything depended on his ability to help. The thorn began to move, slowly at first, then with increasing ease as it came free from the infected tissue. But as it emerged, Ethan realized that this was no ordinary plant material. The object was definitely organic, but unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was twisted and gnarled, with an almost crystalline structure that seemed to catch and hold light in unusual ways. More importantly, tangled around the base of the thorn, so small that he almost missed it, was a tiny piece of fabric. It was weathered and faded, clearly having been exposed to the elements for a long time, but Ethan could make out what appeared to be part of a letter or symbol embroidered on the material. As the cub's breathing immediately became easier and the swelling in its paw began to visibly reduce, Ethan found himself holding not just a strange thorn, but a clue to a much larger mystery. Where had these bears come from, and how had this piece of human-made fabric become embedded with a thorn in a bear cub's paw? The mother bear seemed to sense that the immediate crisis had passed. She leaned down to gently lick her cub's injured paw, her massive tongue carefully cleaning the wound that Ethan had just treated. The little bear's response was immediate and dramatic, its breathing becoming deeper and more regular, its eyes brighter and more alert. But even as relief flooded through Ethan at the success of the procedure, the questions multiplied in his mind. The piece of fabric, the unusual thorn, the bear's obvious journey from somewhere far away, all pointed to a story that was far from over. As he looked at the mother bear, now relaxed and clearly grateful, he realized that this encounter was just the beginning of something much larger and more mysterious than he had ever imagined. The storm had finally begun to weaken as the first hints of dawn crept across the sky, painting the clouds in soft shades of gray and pink. Ethan sat beside the mother bear and her cub, the strange thorn and piece of fabric carefully wrapped in a clean cloth beside him. The immediate crisis had passed, but the mystery had only deepened. The cub was breathing more easily now, its eyes brighter and more alert, but the questions surrounding their arrival seemed to multiply with each passing moment. Ethan's phone buzzed with another message from Lily. "How is the cub doing? I'm still trying to reach you, but the roads are completely washed out. Might not be able to get there until tomorrow at the earliest." He quickly typed back an update about the successful removal of the thorn and the cub's improved condition, but he hesitated before mentioning the piece of fabric. Something told him that this discovery needed to be examined more carefully before he shared it with anyone else. The mother bear had not moved from her protective position beside her baby, but her posture had relaxed considerably since the procedure. She no longer held the tense, desperate stance of a mother watching her child suffer. Instead, she seemed almost peaceful, occasionally looking at Ethan with what could only be described as gratitude. It was a look that transcended species, a recognition of help given and received that needed no words to convey its meaning. As the morning light grew stronger, Ethan could see more details of both bears' condition. The cub was definitely on the mend, moving its injured paw more freely and even attempting to stand on shaky legs. Its mother immediately moved to support it, her massive paw gently steadying the little one as it found its balance. The interaction was so tender, so filled with obvious love and relief, that Ethan felt his eyes water as he watched. But it was the mother bear herself that continued to puzzle him. Now that he could see her clearly in the daylight, the evidence of her long journey was even more apparent. Her paws were worn and scraped from traveling over rough terrain, and there were small cuts and scratches along her legs and sides that spoke of passage through dense underbrush and rocky areas. Most telling of all, she was significantly thinner than a bear should be at this time of year, indicating that she had been traveling for weeks, possibly months, without taking time to properly feed herself. The piece of fabric that had been tangled with the thorn continued to nag at Ethan's mind. He unwrapped it carefully, studying the faded material in the better light. It was clearly synthetic, probably from a piece of outdoor clothing like a jacket or backpack. The embroidered symbol was partially visible, appearing to be the letter M in a distinctive script. The fabric was weathered and faded, but not so old that it had completely deteriorated. Ethan estimated it had been exposed to the elements for perhaps 2 or 3 years. His contemplation was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle, the first mechanical noise he had heard in days. Through the trees, he could see the headlights of what appeared to be a large truck making its way slowly up the muddy access road to his cabin. His heart leaped with the hope that somehow Lily had found a way to reach him. But as the vehicle drew closer, he realized it wasn't her small veterinary van. The truck that pulled into his clearing was a heavy-duty Forest Service vehicle, equipped with chains and a winch for navigating difficult terrain. 2 people emerged from the cab, both wearing the distinctive uniforms of park rangers. Ethan recognized one of them as Sarah Chen, a ranger he had worked with on several research projects over the years. The other was a man he didn't know, older and with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades working in the wilderness. Sarah approached cautiously, her eyes taking in the extraordinary scene before her. A researcher sitting calmly next to a massive mother bear and her cub, with no apparent tension or danger in the situation. It was something that went against everything she knew about wildlife behavior, and her hand instinctively moved toward the radio on her belt. "Ethan," she called out, her voice carefully controlled. "Are you okay? We got reports of unusual bear activity in this area and came to check on you after the storm." Ethan slowly stood, being careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle the mother bear. "I'm fine, Sarah. Actually, I'm better than fine. I've just witnessed something incredible." He gestured toward the bears, who were watching the newcomers with alert but calm attention. "This mother bear brought her sick cub to me for help. She traveled through the hurricane to reach my cabin. The older ranger, whose name tag read Martinez, shook his head in disbelief. "That's impossible, Ethan." Bears don't seek help from humans. They avoid us at all costs, especially when they have cubs. But even as he spoke, his experienced eyes were taking in the scene, noting the obvious lack of aggression from the mother bear and the clear evidence of medical treatment on the cub's paw. Sarah moved closer, her initial alarm giving way to scientific curiosity. As a ranger, she had seen thousands of wildlife interactions, but nothing that resembled what was happening here. "How long have they been here?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Since last night," Ethan replied. "The mother bear walked right up to my cabin in the middle of the storm, carrying her cub. The little one had something embedded in its paw, and she seemed to know that I could help." He showed them the strange thorn and the piece of fabric, watching their expressions change from skepticism to amazement. Martinez examined the thorn carefully, turning it over in his weathered hands. "I've been working in these forests for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. This isn't from any plant that grows in this region." He looked at the piece of fabric with equal interest. "And this looks like it came from hiking gear. Good quality stuff, probably expensive." Sarah was studying the mother bear with the trained eye of a wildlife professional. "She's not local, is she? I mean, she's definitely a brown bear, but there's something different about her size, her coloring. And look at those scars along her back. Those aren't from normal forest encounters." As they talked, the cub had gained enough strength to begin exploring its immediate surroundings, though it stayed close to its mother's protective presence. The little bear showed a remarkable lack of fear toward the humans, occasionally looking at them with curious eyes before returning its attention to testing its newly healed paw. Its mother watched these interactions carefully but showed no signs of defensive behavior. "There's something else," Ethan said, pulling out his phone to show them the photos he had taken during the night. "Look at these images of the extraction. See how the thorn was embedded, and notice how the fabric was wrapped around the base. This wasn't just a random injury from brushing against a thorny plant. Something happened to embed this object, along with a piece of human clothing, deep into this cub's paw." The implications of what he was suggesting began to sink in for all of them. If the fabric was from a hiker's gear, and if it had been embedded in the cub's paw along with the strange thorn, then there was a story here that went far beyond a simple wildlife medical emergency. Someone had been in the forest, someone whose gear had somehow become entangled with whatever had injured the cub. Martinez was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "We need to report this to the search and rescue coordinator. If there's a hiker out there who's been missing for months or years, this could be the first real clue we've had about what happened to them." But even as they discussed the implications of their discovery, the mother bear began to show signs of restlessness. She stood up slowly, her massive frame towering over the group of humans, and gently nudged her cub with her nose. The little bear responded immediately, moving to stand beside its mother with much more stability than it had shown earlier. The message was clear. It was time to go. The mother bear had accomplished what she had set out to do. Her cub was healed, the immediate danger had passed, and now her instincts were telling her to return to the safety of the deep forest. But before she left, she did something that none of them would ever forget. The massive bear walked slowly toward Ethan, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. When she was close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath, she gently pressed her forehead against his chest, just for a moment. It was a gesture of gratitude so clear and unmistakable that it brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching. Then she stepped back, gathered her cub close to her side, and began walking toward the tree line. Sarah reached for her radio, intending to call for a tracking team to follow the bears, but Ethan gently placed his hand on her arm. "Let them go," he said quietly. "They've been through enough. They came here for help, got what they needed, and now they deserve to return to their lives in peace." The three humans stood in silence as the mother bear and her cub disappeared into the forest, their massive forms gradually fading into the green shadows between the trees. The last thing they saw was the cub, now walking steadily on its healed paw, looking back once toward the cabin before following its mother into the wilderness. As the forest settled back into its normal rhythms, the full impact of what had just occurred began to sink in. They had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the relationship between humans and wildlife. The mother bear's journey, her trust, her obvious intelligence and emotional depth, had opened a window into a world that most people never got to see. But the mystery was far from solved. The strange thorn, the piece of fabric with its embroidered initial, the evidence of the bear's long journey from somewhere far beyond the local forest boundaries, all pointed to a larger story that was waiting to be uncovered. Martinez was already on his radio, calling in the discovery to the search and rescue coordinator, while Sarah began documenting the scene with her camera. Ethan picked up the cloth containing the thorn and fabric, holding these mysterious artifacts that represented the only tangible clues to what had happened. As he looked toward the forest where the bears had disappeared, he realized that this encounter had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He had always believed in maintaining professional distance from his research subjects, but the mother bear's trust had shattered those boundaries completely. The sound of another vehicle approaching interrupted his thoughts. This time, it was Lily's veterinary van, finally able to navigate the muddy roads with the help of tire chains and determination. She emerged from the vehicle with her medical bag in hand, ready to help with the emergency that had brought her through dangerous conditions to reach him. "Where are they?" she asked, looking around the empty clearing with confusion. "Your messages made it sound like a life or death situation." Ethan smiled, realizing how much had changed in just a few hours since his desperate texts. "The situation is resolved," he said. "But Lily, you're not going to believe what just happened here." As he began to tell her the story, starting with the mother bear's arrival in the storm and ending with their peaceful departure into the forest, Ethan found himself struggling to put the experience into words. How do you describe the moment when a wild animal looks into your eyes and asks for help? How do you convey the weight of trust that a mother places in a stranger when her child's life hangs in the balance? But as the morning wore on and the story was told and retold to Lily, to the rangers, and eventually to the search and rescue coordinator who arrived to investigate the fabric clue, Ethan began to understand that the real impact of this experience wasn't in the telling. It was in the knowing. in the deep certainty that the boundaries between species were far more porous than anyone had imagined. The piece of fabric was sent to the lab for analysis, and within days the results confirmed what they had suspected. The material was from a high-quality hiking jacket, and the embroidered initial M matched the description of gear belonging to Michael Harrison, an experienced hiker who had disappeared in the region 3 years earlier. The discovery reopened his missing person case and provided the first real lead investigators had found since his disappearance. But for Ethan, the resolution of that mystery was less important than the larger questions that the encounter had raised. He found himself spending hours sitting on his porch, looking toward the forest and wondering about the mother bear and her cub. Were they safe? Had they found their way back to wherever they had come from? And what other stories were hidden in the vast wilderness that surrounded his cabin? The scientific community was fascinated by his account of the bear's behavior, and requests for interviews and research collaborations began pouring in. But Ethan found himself reluctant to turn the experience into just another data point in the study of animal behavior. What had happened here was too personal, too sacred, to be reduced to academic analysis. Instead, he began to approach his research differently, where once he had maintained careful distance from his subjects. Now he found himself looking for opportunities to connect, to understand the emotional and social lives of the animals he studied. The mother bear had shown him that intelligence, love, and trust existed throughout the natural world in ways that science was only beginning to recognize. Months later, as autumn painted the forest in brilliant colors, Ethan was working at his desk when he heard a familiar sound outside. He looked up to see 2 bears at the edge of the clearing, a large mother and a young cub that was now healthy and strong. They stood there for just a moment, as if checking to make sure he was well, before disappearing back into the forest. The cub showed no signs of its previous injury, running and playing with the boundless energy of a young bear in perfect health. But more importantly, both bears carried themselves with the confidence of animals who knew they had a friend in this place, someone who could be trusted if the need ever arose again. As Ethan watched them go, he realized that the mother bear had given him something far more valuable than a fascinating research experience. She had shown him that the natural world was not just a subject to be studied, but a community to be joined, a network of relationships and connections that included every living thing. The piece of fabric and the strange thorn remained in his cabin, carefully preserved as reminders of the night that had changed everything. But the real treasure was the knowledge that somewhere in the vast forest, a mother bear had trusted him with her most precious possession, and that trust had created a bond that would last forever. Years passed, and the story of the mother bear became legend among the rangers and researchers who worked in the region. New generations of wildlife biologists came to study at Ethan's research station, drawn by his reputation for understanding animal behavior in ways that went beyond traditional scientific methods. But Ethan never forgot the lesson that the mother bear had taught him that stormy night. In a world where humans and wildlife were often seen as separate and competing interests, she had shown him that compassion and understanding could bridge any gap. Her journey through the hurricane, her trust in a stranger, her willingness to risk everything for her cub's welfare, had demonstrated the universal nature of love and the power of reaching across boundaries to help one another. The forest around his cabin continued to thrive, and Ethan often found evidence that the bears visited regularly, though they rarely showed themselves. Tracks in the mud after rain, claw marks on trees near the cabin, the occasional glimpse of movement in the shadows between the trees. It was as if they were keeping watch, maintaining the connection that had been forged on that extraordinary night. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and the forest was particularly quiet, Ethan could swear he heard the soft rumbling sounds that the mother bear had made to comfort her cub, carried on the breeze like a lullaby that connected all living things in a song of understanding and love. The mystery of Michael Harrison was eventually solved when his remains were found deep in the forest, along with evidence that he had tried to help a trapped bear cub years earlier. The strange thorn had come from a rare plant species that grew only in the most remote areas of the wilderness, and somehow, in the process of the rescue attempt, a piece of his jacket had become entangled with the plant material and embedded in the cub's paw. The mother bear had carried that burden and the memory of human kindness for 3 long years before finally making the journey to seek help. Her story became a testament to the long memory of wild animals and their capacity for both gratitude and trust. But perhaps the most remarkable part of the entire experience was how it changed everyone who heard the story. Rangers began approaching their work with greater sensitivity to the emotional lives of the animals they protected. Researchers started looking for ways to build trust and understanding rather than simply observing from a distance. And visitors to the forest came with a new appreciation for the intelligence and depth of feeling that existed in the natural world. The mother bear had not just saved her cub that night. She had opened a door between 2 worlds, creating a bridge of understanding that would benefit both humans and wildlife for generations to come. Her journey through the storm had been about more than seeking medical help. It had been about demonstrating that compassion knows no boundaries, that trust can exist between any 2 beings who approach each other with open hearts, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. As Ethan continued his research in the years that followed, he carried with him the memory of that extraordinary night. The mother bear's trust had changed not just his approach to his work, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be part of the natural world. He had learned that science was not just about observation and analysis, but about connection and relationship, about recognizing the common threads that bind all living things together in a tapestry of mutual dependence and care. The story spread far beyond the scientific community, inspiring countless people to look at wildlife with new eyes, to see the individual personalities and emotional depths that existed in every creature. It became a reminder that in a world often divided by differences, the capacity for compassion and understanding could bridge any gap, creating connections that transcended species, language, and cultural boundaries. And somewhere in the vast forest, a mother bear continued to raise her healthy cub, carrying with her the knowledge that when help was needed, it could be found in the most unexpected places. Her journey had become a legend, but more than that, it had become a promise that trust and kindness would always be rewarded, that love would always find a way, and that the bonds between all living things were stronger than any storm that nature could create.